The fantasy genre is one that regularly goes through phases. Different styles of storytelling come in and out of fashion. I personally have had little interest in defining out the difference between high or epic fantasy compared to low fantasy, magical realism, sword and sorcery stories, fables, or urban fantasy. To me, a good story is a good story. I can see the point in working with a set of common conventions and audience expectations. Writing to a specific audience allows for opportunities to simplify your storytelling, to speed up your pacing, or perhaps tinker with audience expectations. I want books and stories that can surprise me in whatever genre I am reading. 2008 was an extremely interesting year for Brandon Sanderson. The Hero of Ages was his fourth published book with US publisher Tor Books, who had accepted his original manuscript Elantris and commissioned him for a 3-book series to follow it up. Mistborn, The Final Empire, was published in 2006, and the 2 sequels came fast. The Well of Ascension and The Hero of Ages each only came a year apart. The author had planned all 3 stories out in advance, and although each is designed to be a satisfactory read alone, there is no denying a solid through line connects all 3. These are dense tomes, all full of surprises and twists that will take even the most hardened fantasy reader by surprise. In his own words, as soon as he had a publisher on board, he wanted to write a calling card to fantasy readers, a trilogy they could read through and get a feel for who he was and what his writing was like. That calling card would turn out to be extremely important for fans of the genre, in a way they could never have expected. 2007 marked the sad passing of acclaimed epic fantasy author Robert Jordan, who had died 12 books into the unfinished epic series Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan was a titan in the fantasy publishing genre, and he had been working on this series, chronicling the journey of Randolph War from country bumpkin to a mad god king of a world in the middle of an epic war since January 1990. His readers were desperate to know if the series would ever be completed, and in December 2007, Robert Jordan's wife Harriet announced she had chosen Brandon Sanderson to complete her husband's work. Why Brandon Sanderson, people asked. There were many reasons given, and also none specifically. And so, when Heroes of Ages was published in 2008, completing Brandon Sanderson's first trilogy, he had a legion of avid readers from the established franchise turn to scrutinise his work to a degree that other fledgling fantasy writers can only dream of. The question is, was this original work found wanting? Each book in the original Mistborn Trilogy is extremely different in tone. Throughout all of them there are mysteries and a progressive sense of discovery, and protagonist Vin learns more about the culture and society of the Final Empire. The setting is post-apocalyptical, a ruined wasteland of a world where humanity has suffered through the Dark Ages, surviving under the heel of a tyrannical Lord Ruler who has split society into 2. The Final Empire is a gripping read. The story moves at a fantastic pace as Vin is brought into the crew and trained for her part in the heist. Brandon Sanderson sets up an interesting magic system based on consuming and then burning precious metals. Consuming different metals allows people to fly, to increase their senses, to affect people's emotions and manipulate crowds, or to just make someone really, really strong. The power is supposed to be a noble trait, but almost everyone in the crew has at least one skill, and Vin and Kelsey are able to burn any metal, making them full Mistborns. Brandon Sanderson has considered the implications of this magical system and the physics thereof in exquisite detail, and he writes with considerable poise each and every one of these powers, constructing scenarios and settings to show off his creation to the reader like a stage magician slowly unveiling his cards one at a time. That isn't to say this is not an emotional book. Vin is an orphan, abandoned by a brother, left only with an earring to remember her family. Her journey from frightened refugee to a living weapon of destruction is told in intimate detail. Kelsey, who sets her onto this path, is a widow burning with righteous fury at the wrongs done to him. Everyone in this story has suffered in one way or another, and the book spends time exploring how people who have been hurt so badly find the strength to come together to do something about it. There is a large and complex cast, but ultimately the tale revolves around Vin determining who and what she is, Kelsey's secrets, and a young noble Ellen Venture's determination to be a good man faced with impossible odds. This, at times, is a particularly gruesome series, with several points of imagery that are disturbing or distasteful. There are gruesome depictions of men and women with pieces of metal rammed through their bodies, people who have their eyes gouged out, who are forced to suffer extreme psychological tortures. This is not a horror series. The author's intent is often not to deliberately shock or freak out or intimidate the readers. This is more of a thorough thought experiment about the consequences of a world where power and metal are linked. Not everybody has the power of a Mistborn, and it seems obvious that over generations, society would search for other ways to redistribute inequality. There are elements of Kelsier and Vin's journey which are distinctly unsuitable for children or people of a sensitive disposition, but whilst it can be gruesome, it can also be beautiful. Brandon Sanderson describes the motion and movement of people imbued with supernatural powers as though they were poetry in motion, somehow treading a fine line, combining both the mathematical precision and high artistry of this piece of work. The task set on Vin, Kelsier and the crew is immense. The setting is dire, but through Kelsier's machinations, Brandon Sanderson plots a story depicting the downfall of a tyrant. And halfway through the book, things really pick up. Because the thing about Brandon Sanderson, above any other fiction writer I've read in recent years, is that he really knows how to do endings. Most stories have a beginning, a middle and an end. The story is set, it progresses, and then things come to a natural conclusion. However, in a good Sanderson book, the advancement from the middle to the end is like a succession of loops on a roller coaster. These books are densely plotted, with layers and layers of mystery, plot twists and character choices that, although they take time to set up, once the action does start, the story accelerates to a nail-biting finale. Chapter after chapter, page after page, revelation after revelation, more facts, secrets and surprises are thrown at the reader, most of which upturn everything we thought we knew about the story. Kelsier, the Lord Ruler, Sazed, the heist, the rebellion. There are secrets and revelations about all of these, and once the floodgates open, the last third of the story roars along to an epic finale. Which is perhaps why the second book can feel like a disappointment. There is a lot to enjoy about the Well of Ascension, but sadly the process of rebuilding the plot, of laying new story threads and introducing new characters slows the pace right back to a crawl. Jumping straight from the final empire to the Well of Ascension can be jarring because the first was so tightly plotted and had so much momentum when it ended, and then the second feels, well, it feels as though it's meandering. It isn't. It's very directed, but it feels as though it is. Because without announcing his intention, Brandon Sanderson has switched genres. The first story was about a heist. The second is more of a Cold War thriller. It's set in a land on the brink of war. It explores the politics and the psychology of cold-blooded killers trying to do what they need to keep the situation contained. Kill a few people here, silence someone there, all done to stop the full-scale massacre that an outright war would bring. Grit your teeth and carry on, because there's hope at the end. In this book, Ellen Venture is promoted from a small love interest to a major protagonist. He becomes king of a doomed kingdom and sets about installing a political democracy, accidentally undermining his own rule at the exact point when the people need clear direction. Some reviewers criticise the length of time spent discussing the merits of political intrigue, but I can see why these choices are made. It is not clear yet that the world is doomed, and by spending time discussing the sort of society that the final empire could become, Brandon Sanderson retains the illusion of hope. If the characters are smart enough, if they figure out the politics and secret mysteries of the Lord Ruler's power, if they fight hard enough and don't give in, it feels like there still is a future. It isn't until the third book, The Hero of Ages, that the truth sets in. This is a doomed world. The Lord Ruler's motivations were not at all what we thought they were. He may have been an egotistical tyrant, but he was also doing his best to hold the world together. The Mistborn universe truly is one of gods and monsters, and the revelations in this final book, which recast everything that came in the first two books, took my breath away. The Hero of Ages, which abandons the political machinations of the second book, becomes a full-on war story. It features the perfect embodiment of an all-powerful foe who cannot be beaten, who cannot be fought, who cannot be negotiated, and they cannot be stopped. The setting and the scenarios mesh perfectly. It is all tied together so effortlessly. The means of Vin's foe's plan and his eventual defeat were sewn all the way back in the opening chapters of the Final Empire, but we never noticed. To say too much more would spoil the effect, but the conclusion of the Hero of Ages left readers in no doubt what Brandon Sanderson was all about. In his final line, he teased that this grand story was just a small part of a larger epic still to be told, the saga of Adonausium. As soon as this book was published, he set about working on the concluding chapters of the Wheel of Time, before returning to his own books. We now have a name for his series. He has announced that most of his books are interconnected in a shared universe that he has termed the Cosmere. Elantris and Mistborn were shortly followed by Warbreaker and then a new fantasy epic, the Stormlight Archive, a series of mammoth doorstopper books that redefine scope in epic fantasy. There were plans for Mistborn sequels that have borne fruit, for sequel series set 100 years later, and a prequel tie-in book relating Kelsier's behind-the-scenes antics. There have been Mistborn card games, audiobooks, plans for a video game, but nothing as yet. The Mistborn Trilogy from Brandon Sanderson is a modern fantasy epic worthy of your time. It's allowed Brandon Sanderson to stamp his own mark on the genre, proving his own worth before he stepped up to complete Robert Jordan's magnum opus. It has flaws and issues, but I would heartily recommend it for any fan of exciting and imaginative fiction.